Well, for more on those policies and the tech battles ahead, I'm joined by Rich Tehrani, live from Stamford, Connecticut. He's the CEO and Group Editor-in-Chief at TMC. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. So let's start with what you see as the biggest policy issues facing tech companies this year.
Sure, I'd say privacy is probably one of the top. We've got all these smart speakers and, in some cases, hidden speakers, video screens, video recording devices all around our homes now. And we rely on companies to keep this data private, keep it secure, and so cybersecurity is another major issue. And as you mentioned a moment ago, antitrust is another big issue in the tech world this year.
Now, we saw that California has also taken this big step towards data privacy. What's new with that law, and which companies do you see being most impacted?
So, as you mentioned at the lead, there are a lot of new issues in the law, a lot of new points in the law in terms of privacy, keeping data secure. There are fines if you don't keep the data secure, and also limits on technology or data that can be sold via the technology gathering. The good news is probably for most companies, there's not a tremendous amount of enforcement behind it. They don't have a lot of people or a big team to really enforce. So the people who are going to be impacted, or the companies that will be impacted, will be the largest companies, the ones that have a big breach, or they do something like sell data they should not have sold. They have something to be really worried about.
And we're certainly seeing more public awareness with this. So what does this extra scrutiny mean for other tech hubs beyond Silicon Valley?
It's going to be a big deal for every company, because all companies are becoming software companies over time. They're collecting more data, they're doing analytics, they're using it for AI, they're trying to get a better handle on who to market to, what sorts of messages to send out. So these sort of privacy rules are crucial, that every company is aware of them. Over time, if they are breached, if there is an issue, or if they do sell the data, they could have numerous organizations coming after them and finding them, whether it's California or New York or the EU with their GDPR. There are a lot of regulations that companies need to be aware of, and they really need to keep consumer data safe.
Now, turning to the corporate aspect, we see the proposed T-Mobile Sprint merger is making its way through the courts. Lawyers are set to give their final arguments coming up on January 15th. What do you see as the make-or-break issues here?
So the issue is, competitively, will Dish, or can Dish act as a counterbalance to losing a major competitor in this space? Can they become a new wireless carrier of consequence? If so, then there's more of a chance of this deal going through. If not, then the issue becomes, will we lose an important competitor in this space, because we don't really have that many wireless carriers at the moment.
Now, some analysts expect a slowdown in some of these big tech mergers and acquisitions in 2020, especially as these antitrust concerns continue to mount. What's your take on how things will play out this year?
It's definitely true if these companies are looking to acquire other companies that are similar in terms of what they're doing. But if they're acquiring outside of their core competency, then they most likely will be safe. And they're smart enough to know, right, the Googles and the Amazons are smart enough to know what sorts of companies that they can get away with acquiring without raising too much of a challenge from the regulators.
Now, we also saw Huawei and other Chinese tech companies under a lot of increased scrutiny in 2019. How do you see their future in the U.S. developing against this backdrop?
So on the one hand, we've heard that companies like Huawei and others are potentially able to surveil the users, and potentially the state can get access to that data, meaning that you wouldn't necessarily want that data in another country's military or in another country's government. And the U.S. government has been very careful to say, okay, we really want to limit what Huawei can sell to our allies or to us. But on the other hand, we've also heard that if China is more open to changing the way they trade with the U.S., for example, not being as manipulative with the currency, reducing the sanctions, reducing tariffs, also not forcing intellectual property transfer. If they do some of those things that the U.S. government wants, then we've heard from President Trump that he would be more flexible with Huawei. So it's kind of an interesting quagmire we're in. We don't necessarily know whether these Chinese companies will be able to freely trade in the U.S. or not.
Right.
And maybe they will be, and maybe there will be some agreement that will be worked out between both countries to allow Chinese companies to freely sell into the U.S. and at the same time the Chinese economy changing to accommodate the needs of the U.S. markets.
All right, thank you very much, Rich Tehrani, there, CEO and Group Editor-in-Chief at TMC.